Hello and welcome to the Imaging Wire show. My name is Brian Casey. I'm managing editor of the Imaging Wire. Got a great episode for you today. We're going to be getting an update from enterprise imaging software company Mach7 Technologies. And our guests are Teri Thomas, CEO and managing director of Mach7, and Barinder Dhillon, product manager at the company. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Brian. Great to be here.
Thank you, Brian. Very happy to be here.
So let's start with introductions. Teri, can you go first and tell us about Mach7 and your role at the company?
Sure, absolutely. I'm happy to be leading this exciting progressive company. Mach7 seeks to complete the patient picture with the patient's pictures. So we are a vendor-neutral archive as well as an imaging a universal viewer. We've got digital pathology. We've got really a broad set of ways to ingest any kind of pixels that are appropriate for providing that enhanced full view of everything related to the patient's imaging. So great company.
Excellent. Barinder, how about you?
As for me, I first started my journey in medical imaging as a radiological technologist, and that's where I sort of developed an appreciation and understanding and a real keen interest in medical imaging workflow specifically. Got a master's in health informatics, and then I was able to join this wonderful company as an application specialist, and then eventually as a product manager. And really, really loving it so far.
All right, perfect. Well, let's just dive right in. So Teri, enterprise imaging has become, so important in radiology. And when you look at enterprise imaging, do you think the industry is approaching it maybe a little bit differently than it did 5 or 10 years ago?
I think that's a great question. I've been in this industry for a while. I came from the EMR world into the imaging world. And, 5 or 10 years ago, there was a lot of focus on consolidation and standardization. And I think what's happened in this industry is that the conversation has become a lot more nuanced. There's a bigger mix of legacy platforms together with some really newer technologies, cloud, regional networks. I even look at the impact, seems a long time ago, but COVID drove a big growth in teleradiology, and people's expectations have shifted too, expecting that you can read images and access images from almost anywhere. And so when you put that together with literally hundreds of data sources of pixelated data, the growth of areas, like I mentioned, digital pathology, cardiology is way more than radiology these days. And then layer in this exciting area of rapid growth in technology, AI. That's really changed how people are looking at imaging. And we're hearing from customers now that people want to modernize, but they don't want to create too much disruption. They have to incorporate and connect older technologies. And some of the PACS vendors out there in our industry have had similar technology in place for 10, 20 years. We see customers that are still using some of the first packs, the first time migrating off of films. They have some stability. They want to hang on to that. But all of a sudden, there's all of this new stuff they want to bring in. And then you even layer on open records and patients wanting access to their images, patients using MyChart and other portals. They're going to Dr. Google as they go to their doctor. And they're trying to pull all of this information together and make sense of it themselves. And then we've got these healthcare providers who are saying, well, gosh, I need to guide this patient. I need complete access to all of these different types of images as well. So it's no longer let's just standardize or let's try to get everything into one place, but rather how do we gracefully connect older and newer technologies, traditional images, and then this growth of a much more comprehensive view of all of the pictures associated with the patient across a complex, distributed clinical and operational environment. The one thing that's consistent, though, is that speed is still incredibly important. So how do we access context, but access it in a way that is, shifting from just simply where is it stored to how do we pull it together?
Excellent. Now, Teri, do you think that healthcare organizations are starting to realize that a single standardized approach doesn't always line up with, the operational workflow needs of the people that are kind of on the front lines there?
Yeah, it's both a great question, but it also kind of characterizes where we are pretty well. So they absolutely want to have some enterprise governance. They want some consistency. They want the benefits that come from standardization. But CIOs in particular are getting a much broader understanding that imaging workflows are highly specialized and that one size fits all kind of model can create some real operational strain if it's too rigid. So, looking at imaging as something way broader than radiology, I think is a shift at the C-suite level. We still need to make sure that a radiologist reading an image, even in the ED for a trauma case, it needs to be fast. You need some context, but their workflow is very different from a pathologist who's working with whole slide imaging and a teleradiologist who's covering multiple hospitals with different requirements and different EMRs. So the more sophisticated conversation now is really not so much do we standardize, but how do we standardize intelligently while still preserving some flexibility for the workflows? And from our perspective, this is where orchestration becomes so important. That goal to provide enterprise-wide interoperability and some governance layer to create some sanity without forcing every single department into the same operational model. That's one of the areas where Barinder and my executive team overall, we spend a lot of time actually out on site with our customers, understanding their operational needs, and what are their long-term goals that we can meet their short-term needs for that flexibility, but still create that model that allows them to be able to evolve with technology. Barinder, do you want to add
Yeah,
more to that?
we definitely see that on the ground as well, where all of these different clinicians and these different teams, they do have very, very different workflows because as you get just increasing sophistication, which is natural, right? Medicine is evolving at a rapid pace. People are going to develop new ways of doing old things, and also they're going to discover new diseases and new drugs that they need to implement, new technologies. It's it's very, very difficult to find just one thing that meets all those needs and does them in a way that really empowers users to provide the best patient care. And really, it's difficult on the operational side of things as well if you have this one tool, because how do you get buy-in, and especially the type of buy-in that you need to really implement something efficiently and effectively and have users not develop like some of these weird workarounds that are poorly documented. Because what you see is a lot of people think if I get this one solution, it'll make things operationally more just much more simpler. But really what it kind of does is it gives you a different type of complexity where now you have all these scattered workflows and all of these workarounds that you're not really aware of and you're not able to sort of manage and keep track of. And also the costs become hidden as well. If you have these workarounds and these poorly functioning systems that aren't really optimized, you get this effect on patient care doesn't really that's really difficult to capture. Like one of the great examples I think about when I think about this problem is there's a surgeon in the OR that I saw who didn't have access to a really, really good enterprise viewer. And so what he did was he would take screenshots of the CT scan slices that are of interest, paste them in a Word document, and pull those up. And it's like
Oh,
which cases ended up having worse patient outcomes because he didn't have access to high quality imaging. You don't know
oh
because that doesn't
gosh.
show up in reports, right? And so the
Yeah.
costs end up becoming really hidden.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Now, no, Barinder, let's talk a little bit more about interoperability. And the industry talks a lot about it, but many healthcare organizations are still operating with a really fragmented imaging environment. Why is interoperability so difficult?
Yeah. And I think Teri actually touched upon it really well early on when she talked about the fact that they have these really old legacy technology, like these legacy systems in place, but they're mixed in with these new systems. And it's the new systems that have made really good use of these standards for interoperability, like FHIR, like DICOM Web. And the fit between these newer, more modern systems and these legacy systems is kind of a wonky fit. They're very ill-fitting systems. And so every additional system that you add, it's a source of friction. And really, when we talk about friction, it's all of these little things that add up. Like extra step here in the workflow, an extra application that you have to navigate to, an extra alert that you have to deal with. And all of these things just add up, and it's a cumulative effect, this friction that slows things down, it grinds morale down. And those are the real sort of contributors to or interoperability, because it's not just a capability issue. It's not just the fact that I've adopted the standard and therefore I'm interoperable. Interoperability without usability is frankly useless, right? You need to be able to have something that's interoperable, not just in the way that it speaks, but also interoperable in that it fits into these flexible, ever-evolving workflows. And one of the things that we see is it places a huge burden on operational IT teams, right? Because each of these sources of friction, they're also sources of errors, which means that they're sources of escalations. When they want to implement something new, it's implemented. It's difficult to plan what the impact is going to be, what the effect is going to be, because you don't know how it's going to interact with this legacy system versus those more modern systems. So it becomes really, really challenging. And you have to understand that it's not just a technical challenge, but it really is an operational challenge. You need to have the right technology, but you also need to have the right processes in place and the right sort of mindset as well, the right change management in place to get all these things working together in a way that is really efficient and user friendly.
Yeah, that's a great point. Now, Terry, do you feel like healthcare organizations are getting more cautious about locking themselves into, like a long-term technology models?
Yeah, I do see that as a trend. There are some strong benefits in optionality. And, I'm a maybe unusual CEO in that I really do like to get out and talk with customers. And one of the things I often ask is, why do you have Mach 7? What are the benefits that you get from Mach 7? And one of the things that I hear is you are our ability to pivot other vendors in and out, and that's actually really important. There is a vendor lock-in pain that we see in our industry where you have to have hours. It's very traumatic to take something out, one PACS vendor to another vendor, one specialty system to another specialty system. And technology is evolving really quickly. And so organizations that want to make modernization decisions want to make sure that they create the ability to make that pivot by having a strong vendor neutral archive and really leaning in on that vendor neutrality where there's not lock-in, there's not, costs or issues with trying to access the data. And it's especially important when people are starting to look at things like the cloud and AWS. There's some organizations that went quickly into the cloud and then were in a lot of pain when there was an outage. We look at some of our customers in other countries that have had some instability, and fundamentally, cloud is somebody else's data center. And so creating that ability to make sure that there's, hybrid approaches available that people keep their options open to keep their risk exposure low, incredibly important. The other thing that's, really big for flexibility is just looking at what's happening with AI and data access. We've got a funny concept from my Epic days, being a very heavy traveler. It was sometimes more efficient and cost effective for us to charter planes to places. And people have asked, well, you fly so much, why don't you just buy a plane? Well, the answer was that you've got all different planes tailored to 5 passengers, 8 passengers, 3 passengers, long haul, short haul. The minute you buy that plane, you were locked into it. And you don't want to buy this huge jet that's going to work for everything. And that applies in imaging in the same way. It's really rare that one system will meet everyone's needs today as well as in the future. And then when you put AI and cloud into it, people want the ability to pivot. And that's one of the reasons that they come to us, is having that stable base so that they can access all of the images consistently, but still be able to try a new technology, new cameras, new equipment, and that still is a consistent offering to their end users, who, by the way, are a little bit fatigued by all of the changes in technology. And, we all heard that there's, we're not going to need radiologists. AI is going to come and replace, but I think we all know there's a shortage of radiologists. So people are competing and trying to provide an experience that's also very sensitive to stability for the end user, even in the face of making CFO decisions that are important to be cost effective.
That's a great point. Now, Terry, what do you think the next phase of enterprise imaging is going to look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I think more connected, more adaptable, and data utility. people are thinking about AI and they're thinking about how do I apply AI appropriately to my population? And so the value of the data, organizing the data is really, really important. Even outside of imaging, AI starts forcing you to think about your infrastructure and how are you going to leverage the data in the future in a different way than you might have leveraged it in the past. So we're seeing organizations looking for ways to make that imaging data available and create alternative paths to value while still maintaining good performance and flexibility at an end user level. So people are thinking more about openness, they're thinking about flexibility for the future, and they are thinking beyond the architecture of yesterday. And that, drives a lot of our decision making at Mach7.
I think one of the interesting things you mentioned is like is the desire for organizations to adopt these new tools, all of these AI algorithms that they really want to be able to test out, and and not just test out and adopt one or two, but then another one another one comes out that's even better, move to that one. They want that flexibility and that ability to pivot quickly. And one of the things that I noticed that a lot of people are thinking about are looking for points of workflow consolidation. And so that could be an application that integrates really well with some of the different silos that they have, but also some of the different applications that they have, legacy and new. But it's also even within an application. So a good like sort of slick example is just the idea of a triage score, right? If you have a triage score that's based on, oh, whether or not this AI algorithm put out a finding, great. That lets you have a really easy way of integrating that AI algorithm's value into your workflow. But then what if you have 4 or 5 algorithms and you also have a rule? When you can integrate all those, you can have a consolidated score, and it's just one number, and it's where the user expects it. That doesn't change, but the underlying complexity and the sophistication that your organization wants is kind of hidden beneath that. And so having a bunch of these things and that's the thing that makes new software systems so valuable as well. It's how well do they allow us to consolidate all these points of complexity for the end user. So you have this sort of abstraction layer where you have the complexity underneath that your organization is able to manage and get a lot of value out of and pivot and be like fast and agile and really, really innovative in your own right. But then for your end user, you're able to have that abstraction layer that keeps things calm and really easy to use for them. And they don't feel any sort of instability in the way that they carry out their day-to-day tasks. So I think that's like a really important thing that people are kind of picking up on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, Barinder, we have SIM coming up, the Society for Imaging Informatics and Medicine. That's just going to be right around the corner in Pittsburgh. What kind of conversations do you expect to be having there at SIM?
So I think SIM in many ways is going to be a continuation of what we saw at RSNA. So one of the themes I noticed when walking around RSNA and speaking to people was excitement over agentic AI. But that was spoken more in like aspirational terms. Like, and it's the idea of an AI that is not just a producer of data, but it's now a consumer of data, a user of data in its own right. Something that can learn how a user is going to behave, what a user needs, so you can finally fulfill that sort of promise of give me what I want before I even know I need it. And really, that agentic AI, that concept of something that is agentic, is able to be trusted to operate independently, is sort of key to that. And so I think we're going to start seeing the next steps in that sort of process, just the same way that we saw the conversations around AI evolving. We're just a couple of RSNAs ago, it went from, hey, do you have an AI strategy? To very quickly being, this is how we're really thinking about implementing it and operationalizing it and drawing value from it. And I think people are already looking forward. And the next step is, how do we get AI to work in a more autonomous fashion, and what do those workflows look like, but also not in a way that replaces clinicians, because we already, we're well past that, oh, is AI going to replace radiologists debate? It's not. We already know that. But not replace clinicians, but how does it really, really augment them, and in a way that is invisible, behind the scenes, seamless?
Yep. And so after SIM, we'll have summer, and hopefully everybody will be able to take a little bit of vacation. But then after that, we'll be planning for RSNA. So Teri, what can we expect to see without giving away too much detail? What kind of directions are we going to see from Mach7 between in the kind of the months running up to RSNA?
Yeah, great question. It's, I think every single day about the impact of AI and, the Wayne Gretzky quote about our job is to go where the hockey puck is going versus polishing the ice under where it is right now. And so I keep thinking about the concept, the leap that we will be making over time, which is from training people on how to use software and having a user conform to the constraints the software provides, to training the software on the needs of the user, focused on clear clinical outcomes. And I always come back to what's our customer experience and what's the patient experience. And so that complexity that we started this whole interview on, with what's happening with the hundreds of data sources of images and how does that fit together with what's in the EMR, and completing the patient's picture with all of those patient pictures, knowing that you've got video and you've got an increase of all different sources of images. To me, the thing that we as Mach7 are doing is working really closely with our innovative customers on creating that future together and ensuring that leveraging the vendor neutrality that we come from, and the flexibility that our customers look to from us to help architect a future in which they can trust the data that they get. And I think that's what it comes down to more than anything. A safe AI future is an AI future in which you've got a strong data foundation that you can believe is reliable, and that's what's going to drive a good user experience and positive patient outcomes.
Awesome. Those are some great thoughts to finish with. Well, I'd like to thank Teri Thomas and Barinder Dhillon of Mach7 Technologies for being with us today. It's really been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you so much, Brian. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, signing off for the Imaging Wire. My name is Brian Casey.